A silver spoon drips a thick amber liquid into a crying infant's mouth. A Victorian mother rocks a wooden cradle in a dim, soot-stained nursery. A glass bottle sits on a mahogany vanity, its label promising relief from the agony of teething. A single fluid ounce of that syrup holds 65 milligrams of pure morphine. A child stops screaming, falling into a sleep that looks peaceful but masks a chemical trap. Thousands of infants in the slums of London and New York never woke up from that silence. The medicine cabinet of the 19th century was the most dangerous place in the home. The reality was that Victorian society viewed morphine as a miracle of modern science. It was not a hidden poison, but a household staple sold over the counter. Jeremiah Curtis and Benjamin A. Perkins built a massive commercial empire on this exact premise. They marketed Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup as a gentle necessity for every growing family. Parents saw the product as a reliable way to manage the inescapable exhaustion of child-rearing. They had no way of knowing the concentration of the drug was high enough to kill an adult. The medical establishment of the time provided the intellectual cover for this widespread use. Doctors routinely prescribed opiates for everything from persistent coughing to female hysteria. The British Pharmacopoeia officially listed morphine as a legitimate treatment for a variety of common ailments. Working-class mothers relied on a concoction known as Godfrey's cordial to manage their daily lives. This mixture of opium, treacle, and sassafras kept children sedated during long shifts in textile factories. It was a pragmatic, if lethal, solution to the crushing poverty of the industrial age. The danger was compounded by a complete lack of public transparency. Manufacturers faced no legal requirement to list ingredients on their colorful, persuasive packaging. A mother in a crowded tenement could buy a bottle of soothing syrup without a single warning. She believed she was soothing a teething pain that kept the whole building awake at night. She did not know the syrup was slowing her child's breathing until it stopped altogether. Historians later documented that many cases of sudden infant death in Victorian slums were accidental overdoses. The remedy for the infant's discomfort was the very thing ending its life. But to understand why this nightmare became the standard of care, you need to see the laboratory breakthrough that first unlocked the power of the poppy. In 1804, a German pharmacist named Friedrich Serturner succeeded in isolating an alkaloid from raw opium. He published his formal findings in 1817, naming the substance morphium after the Greek god of dreams. This was the first time a scientist had successfully separated an active medicinal ingredient from a plant. The chemical was calculated to be 10 times more potent than the raw opium used for centuries. Pharmacists and physicians were captivated by the potential of such a concentrated, predictable dose. The era of the miracle drug had arrived, and the world was entirely unprepared for the consequences. A dim, candlelit laboratory in Paderborn, Germany, flickered in the winter of 1804. A young pharmacist named Friedrich Serturner stood over a series of glass beakers. He worked with raw opium, a substance humanity had consumed in its crude, sticky form for thousands of years. His goal was to isolate the specific chemical that triggered the plant's powerful effects. He combined the opium with ammonia and water in a precise, repeated cycle. White, crystalline structures slowly precipitated out of the dark, murky solution. This was a scientific first. No chemist had ever successfully separated an active alkaloid from a medicinal plant before. Friedrich Serturner tasted the bitter crystals and felt their immediate, numbing power. He named the substance morphium after Morpheus, the ancient Greek god of dreams. He published his formal findings in 1817, revealing the secret trapped within the poppy. The reality was that this new, isolated powder was 10 times more potent than raw opium. But to understand why this discovery shifted the course of history, you need to see the medical world of the early 1800s. Physicians were desperate for reliable tools to fight the agony of surgery and chronic illness. They viewed the crude, unpredictable nature of raw opium as a flaw in their medical toolkit. Friedrich Serturner offered them a concentrated, predictable, and measurable alternative. The scientific community reacted with immediate, fervent excitement. Pharmacists across Europe began to replicate the extraction process in their own shops. They believed they had tamed the chaos of the natural world. They were convinced that a pure, refined medicine could never cause the same harm as a raw drug. The era of the miracle drug had arrived. The world was entirely unprepared for the consequences of this newfound chemical precision. The laboratory breakthrough transformed a botanical product into a potent industrial-grade pharmaceutical. It paved the way for the hypodermic needle and the widespread reliance on morphine. The god of dreams had been pulled from the poppy and placed into a glass vial. Every doctor in Europe began to view this white powder as the ultimate solution for human pain. They did not yet realize that they had merely unlocked a new and deeper form of dependency. In 1853, the medical world underwent a fundamental shift in Edinburgh, Scotland. A physician named Alexander Wood sought a more efficient way to deliver medicine. He developed a hollow needle and a small glass syringe. His invention allowed for the direct injection of liquids into the human body. Across the English Channel in France, a surgeon named Charles Prévost worked independently. Charles Prévost designed his own version of the hypodermic syringe that same year. The two men provided doctors with a tool that bypassed the digestive system entirely. But to understand why this invention accelerated a crisis, you need to see the prevailing medical logic of the time. Doctors believed the stomach was the primary source of the opiate habit. They thought the digestive process caused the unwanted side effects of morphine. Alexander Wood and his contemporaries assumed that injecting the drug directly into the bloodstream would be safer. They believed it would provide pain relief without the risk of physical dependency. The reality was exactly the opposite. The hypodermic needle delivered the morphine directly to the nervous system with terrifying speed. It intensified the physiological impact of the drug rather than mitigating it. Patients felt the effects of the injection within seconds. Physicians soon began using the device to treat a wide array of chronic conditions. They injected morphine for localized neuralgia and persistent muscle pain. The medical community hailed the hypodermic needle as a triumph of modern engineering. They did not yet understand that they had created a delivery system for addiction. The new technology made the administration of morphine simple and discreet. Doctors carried their syringes in small leather cases during their daily rounds. They offered injections to patients suffering from exhaustion or minor aches. The ease of the procedure turned a medical tool into a habitual necessity. Patients who received an injection felt an immediate, overwhelming sense of relief. They quickly began to equate the sharp prick of the needle with the end of their suffering. The medical fallacy that injection prevented addiction became the foundation of a growing public health disaster. Physicians continued to promote the method as a clean, scientific advancement. They ignored the mounting evidence of withdrawal symptoms among their own patients. The hypodermic needle did not solve the problem of morphine dependency. It simply ensured that the drug reached the brain with maximum potency. The era of the miracle cure had entered a new, more dangerous phase. The medical establishment remained blind to the consequences of their own innovation. They had successfully removed the bitter taste of the syrup from the mouth. They had replaced it with the silent, efficient needle. The path toward a massive systemic crisis was now firmly established. The medical journals of the mid-19th century painted a picture of a society in constant, quiet agony. Doctors across Britain and the United States viewed pain as an enemy to be silenced at any cost. The British Pharmacopoeia officially listed morphine as a legitimate standard treatment for a wide range of common ailments. Medical textbooks of the era categorized persistent coughing as a primary target for opiate intervention. Physicians regularly prescribed morphine to women suffering from what they termed female hysteria. The condition was a catch-all diagnosis for everything from anxiety to mild fatigue. Doctors treated the symptom, not the source, by administering the drug in tinctures and syrups. Summer complaint was another common, deadly affliction that plagued Victorian families. The term referred to the severe, often fatal diarrhea that swept through crowded cities during the warmer months. Physicians relied on morphine to suppress the intestinal distress associated with these outbreaks. The drug offered immediate, visible relief to the patient. It slowed the body's functions and masked the severity of the underlying illness. In the eyes of the 19th century medical community, this was a triumph of clinical practice. They saw no reason to question the long-term effects of a substance that worked so effectively in the short term. The medical establishment viewed raw opium as inconsistent and unreliable. Refined morphine, however, was seen as a clean, predictable, and scientific tool. But to understand why this consensus proved so destructive, you need to look at the ingredients hidden in the common household medicine cabinet. Pharmacists stocked their shelves with bottles containing concentrated opiate solutions. Every local apothecary acted as a gateway for the mass distribution of these substances. Physicians did not yet realize that they were normalizing the daily consumption of a powerful, habit-forming narcotic. Patients trusted their doctors implicitly. They followed the prescribed doses for coughs, aches, and general malaise without suspicion. The culture of the era treated these medications as essential household staples. A bottle of morphine-based tonic sat next to the tea and the sugar in most Victorian homes. The medical consensus provided a veneer of safety to a growing public health crisis. Doctors provided the legitimacy. The pharmaceutical industry provided the supply. The public provided the demand for a life free from discomfort. The reality was that an entire generation was becoming physically dependent on a medical standard that nobody dared to challenge. The Industrial Revolution transformed the lives of the working class. Factories in 19th century Britain demanded long, grueling hours from every able-bodied person. Mothers worked 12 to 14 hours a day in textile mills. Their infants remained at home in cramped, unsanitary urban tenements. Care for these children fell to neighbors or elderly relatives who could not manage the noise. The solution arrived in the form of a thick, dark liquid known as Godfrey's cordial. The mixture contained a potent blend of raw opium, treacle, and sassafras. It functioned as a powerful sedating narcotic for restless children. But to understand why this substance became a staple, you need to see the desperation of the Victorian slums. A mother could purchase a bottle for a few pennies from a local apothecary. She administered the syrup to her infant before heading to the factory floor. The morphine content within the opium suppressed the child's hunger and muffled their cries. It forced the infant into a deep, heavy slumber for hours on end. This allowed the mother to maintain her employment without the threat of dismissal for absenteeism. The reality was that the city's working class was raising a generation of physically dependent children. Medical observers of the time noted the frequent unnatural stillness of infants in industrial districts. Many children suffered from chronic constipation and stunted growth. Their bodies became accustomed to the daily dose of the cordial. If the dose was withheld, the infants experienced severe withdrawal symptoms. They screamed in agony, suffered tremors, and refused to eat. The cycle of dependency ensured that the child remained quiet only while under the influence of the drug. Historians have documented that many cases of sudden infant death in these districts were likely accidental overdoses. The concentration of opium in these cordials was never standardized. One batch could be significantly more lethal than the previous one. The medical establishment largely ignored the human cost of this widespread practice. The syrup provided a convenient, low-cost solution to the logistical problem of childcare. It kept the factories running and the workforce compliant. The silence in the tenements was not a sign of peace. It was the result of a systematic, chemical sedation of the most vulnerable population. The Victorian era prioritized industrial output over the physical health of its youngest citizens. This reliance on Godfrey's cordial became a hidden, tragic foundation of the industrial age. The American Civil War arrived in 1861 with a scale of carnage that overwhelmed the medical facilities of the era. Surgeons on the front lines faced thousands of soldiers suffering from shattered limbs and horrific abdominal wounds. The standard treatment for severe trauma was immediate amputation. Physicians relied on the new hypodermic syringe to deliver localized pain relief to the wounded. The device allowed for the rapid injection of morphine directly into the bloodstream. It bypassed the slower absorption of oral tinctures. Doctors believed that direct injection avoided the digestive issues associated with opium. They considered the technique a breakthrough in military medicine. The reality was that the hypodermic needle accelerated the physiological hold of the drug. Soldiers received multiple injections throughout their recovery process. Many veterans left the battlefield with a habit they could not break. By 1865, the war concluded, but a new health crisis emerged. Medical professionals documented a widespread condition among returning soldiers. They labeled the phenomenon soldier's disease. An estimated 400,000 veterans returned home physically dependent on morphine. The substance had become the primary tool for managing chronic pain from war injuries. Men who had entered the conflict as healthy civilians struggled to function without their daily dose. Society viewed these veterans with a complex mix of sympathy and confusion. The medical establishment had provided the solution, yet it had also created the dependency. Public perception gradually shifted as the scale of the addiction became impossible to ignore. But to understand why this moment marked a turning point, you need to see the intersection of military necessity and pharmaceutical availability. The widespread use of the hypodermic needle during the war effectively normalized the practice of injection. It transformed morphine from a medicinal tonic into a daily lifestyle requirement for a generation of men. The tragedy of the Civil War was not merely the loss of life on the field. It was the quiet, lingering agony of hundreds of thousands of men trapped in a cycle of chemical need. The medical community had unwittingly turned the veterans of a national conflict into a massive population of addicts. The era of unrestricted medical usage was beginning to show its lethal costs. The British government finally acknowledged the mounting death toll in 1868. Parliament passed the Pharmacy Act to curb the sale of lethal substances. The legislation targeted the unregulated distribution of opium and its derivatives. Shopkeepers could no longer sell these poisons to any random customer. The law required that only licensed pharmacists handle the sale of dangerous drugs. These professionals had to record every transaction in a formal register. The era of unrestricted access to morphine and opium began to fracture. But to understand the true impact, you need to see how deeply these substances had penetrated the daily lives of citizens. The market had functioned without oversight for nearly a century. Every corner store sold bottles of laudanum alongside bread and tea. The Pharmacy Act introduced a requirement for clear, cautionary labels on all bottles. The word poison had to appear in bold print on the packaging. This simple change forced a confrontation with the reality of the ingredients. Families started to associate their medicine cabinets with genuine, physical danger. The law did not eliminate the addiction crisis overnight. It merely shifted the power from the unregulated merchant to the state-sanctioned expert. The medical establishment began to view these substances with newfound scrutiny. Doctors faced new pressures to justify the prescription of addictive narcotics. The unchecked flow of morphine into the public sphere met its first legal barrier. The status quo of Victorian medicine was no longer sustainable. The act served as a warning that the government finally recognized the cost. The uncontrolled distribution of morphine had reached its historical limit. The era of the unregulated tonic was beginning to fade. But the industry was already preparing a new, more aggressive response to these restrictions. The demand for relief remained, and the pharmaceutical giants were ready to capitalize on the shift. The year was 1898 in Germany. The pharmaceutical giant Bayer launched a new product. They called the compound diacetylmorphine. The company branded the drug as heroin. Marketing materials claimed it was a non-addictive substitute. Advertisements suggested it was safer than morphine. The firm promoted the drug as a miracle cough suppressant. Doctors prescribed the syrup to children with respiratory issues. The bottles arrived in pharmacies across Europe and America. Bayer insisted the chemical was free from the dangers of opium. Medical journals published reports praising its rapid efficacy. Physicians believed the manufacturer's clinical claims. The reality was far more dangerous than the marketing promised. Diacetylmorphine was significantly more potent than standard morphine. It crossed the blood-brain barrier with terrifying speed. The drug induced a deeper physiological dependence in patients. Parents dosed their children with the syrup for minor colds. Families trusted the reputation of the Bayer brand. The medical community ignored the early signs of abuse. Reports of severe withdrawal symptoms began to emerge. Patients developed a tolerance that required increasing doses. The promised safety profile proved to be a lie. Doctors later discovered the chemical converted back into morphine. The body metabolized the drug into an even stronger opiate. The cycle of addiction accelerated with every new prescription. Patients found themselves trapped in a more severe dependency. The public remained unaware of the chemical reality. The myth of the non-addictive substitute persisted for years. Bayer continued to distribute the product to global markets. The company ignored the growing evidence of patient harm. But to understand why this moment mattered, you need to see the scale of the deception. The industry had successfully rebranded a lethal substance as a cure. The medical establishment had failed to verify the manufacturer's data. The era of pharmaceutical marketing had entered a darker phase. Patients paid the price for the company's profit-driven narrative. The consequences of the 1898 campaign would haunt the next century. By 1910, the medical community finally acknowledged the truth. Clinicians documented that heroin was more addictive than morphine. The initial marketing claims collapsed under the weight of clinical evidence. The drug was no longer viewed as a medical breakthrough. It was recognized as a significant public health catastrophe. The state eventually moved to intervene in the distribution. The United States government enacted the Jones-Miller Act in 1924. The law officially prohibited the production and sale of heroin. The era of the miracle cough suppressant reached its end. The damage to thousands of patients was already complete. The history of Bayer's product remains a lesson in corporate liability. The trust of the public had been exploited for commercial gain. The medical community learned the cost of unchecked pharmaceutical power. The American landscape shifted in 1906. Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act. This legislation ended the era of secret ingredients. Manufacturers now faced a strict federal mandate. Every bottle required a clear printed list of contents. The public finally saw the truth inside their medicine cabinets. Labels revealed the presence of morphine in common tonics. Trust in the patent medicine industry collapsed overnight. Families discovered the soothing syrups were merely potent narcotics. The illusion of the harmless remedy shattered. But to understand why this transparency was so transformative, you need to see the deception that preceded it. For decades, the labels promised health and vitality. The reality was a hidden dependency on addictive alkaloids. Consumers read the fine print and recognized the danger. The word morphine appeared on bottles sold for teething infants. Parents realized they had been dosing their children with poison. Retailers faced a sudden, massive decline in sales. The marketplace forced a reckoning with the medical reality. Public health advocates used the data to shift the national conversation. The era of the unregulated miracle cure ceased to exist. Government oversight replaced the unchecked claims of the manufacturer. The legislative change marked a permanent break with the past. The mystery behind the soothing tonics had finally dissolved. Transparency revealed the human cost of the pharmaceutical boom. The age of the secret ingredient was officially over. The medical revolution reached its legislative conclusion in 1914. The United States government enacted the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. This law demanded a strict accounting of every grain of opium and morphine. Doctors and pharmacists faced federal oversight for the first time. The era of the over-the-counter miracle cure vanished under the new tax code. The government transformed the substance from a household staple into a controlled commodity. Physicians no longer dispensed morphine with reckless, unchecked freedom. The Jones-Miller Act followed in 1924 to seal the transition. Congress officially prohibited the production and sale of heroin. The legal framework finally caught up to the clinical reality of addiction. The public health landscape moved from total chaos to systematic regulation. Historians later examined the records of Victorian slums with clinical precision. They traced the high rates of unexplained infant mortality across the 19th century. Data confirmed the link between sudden deaths and the regular use of soothing syrups. Thousands of infants had succumbed to accidental morphine overdoses in their own cradles. The promise of a quiet, peaceful child masked a lethal reality. The medical establishment had failed the most vulnerable residents of the city. The legacy of the Victorian pharmacy was a trail of hidden, quiet tragedies. The shift toward criminalization left the underlying demand for relief entirely unaddressed. The cycle of addiction moved from the parlor and the pharmacy into the shadows. You live in a world built on the wreckage of these failed promises. You reach for the bottle on your own shelf, trusting the label is the truth. The history of the cure is the history of the poison you hold now.